This season on Deadline Crime.
Being sold for sex every single day.
And had to give everything to him.
Every cent.
Yes.
Kidnapped.
Were you ever afraid for your life?
Murdered.
I made a promise to my son that I would find out who took his life.
Justice.
18 months of investigation, 4 weeks of trial. Here's the big moment.
Wow.
Deadline Crime with Tamron Hall. All news Sundays at 10. Only on Investigation Discovery. Stream live and catch up on ID Go. Download for free now.
Emma, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, I'm giving you too much leg for a crime show.
You look amazing. I told you this in the green room. I love what you're wearing.
Thank you. I said I'm the love child of Andre Leon Talley and J-Lo because I got nailed. No, it's a young designer. His name is Ruben, and I was with Andre in St. Louis. They have this thing called the St. Louis Fashion Fund. So these are young emerging designers. They're out of fashion school, but they are, ready for their big break and super talented. He's great, and he actually did Beyonce's outfit for her push party. So you're close to Beyonce.
When you heard that, were you like, I'm in?
I was like, send me 6,000 of them. So
going into season 5 right now of Deadline Crime, right?
Yeah.
When you first decided to do this show, to take it on, what were you thinking about? What was on your mind? Why did you want to do the show?
I'll be very honest. I was in a meeting with David Zaslav. He's the CEO of Discovery Communications, and Henry Schleif, who's the president of ID. And we were talking about ideas in general. We didn't know if I was going to do something on Oprah's network. There was no clear idea. They just wanted to partner with me on something. And David and Henry started talking with me about my life and what my interests were. And I can't even tell you how it came up. I think David asked me about my family, and I'd mentioned my sister was murdered, and it was an unsolved case. I didn't even know, full disclosure, that ID was doing crime. I really, believe it or not, don't watch a lot of TV, even though I've been on TV since I was 18. I'm gonna put myself out of business. But and we just kind of organically started talking about it. And the first season of the show, we had reporters, and I would toss to the stories. And they did a focus group, and the focus group said, we'd like to see her. She's a reporter, she's connected, and she brings an emotional component. And that's where and how the story was born.
And now you had, prior to the show, you'd already been doing some work with domestic violence groups based after your sister's death, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, around the corner from here. I just started out with NBC, and I received an invitation to host this event for this organization, and I said, it's called Day One, and they go into public schools to talk about dating healthy, that love doesn't have to hurt. And I actually think the original MC canceled or couldn't make it, and they asked me for whatever reason to do it, and I'm there, right around the corner of the Bowery, and 2 young women, one was about 14, the other was 16, and they were telling the most horrific stories about being beaten in relationships. One girl had received staples in her head. I mean, just things that no one, let alone a teenager, should be experiencing. And I was sitting there very quiet, Ricky, and I didn't say anything. And then finally, we have this saying, and some of you might know, it's fair exchange, no robbery. And I felt that I was robbing them of their story. They were telling everything that had happened to them, but I was saying nothing about what had happened to my own family. And for the first time publicly, I told this audience filled with people what happened to my sister. And I'd never discussed it outside of my family. And mind you, I was on TV in Chicago as the morning show anchor at a station there, and I'd never said a word. But I could not let these young girls be so brave, and I sit there and pretend that it hadn't impacted my own family. So it started there.
What was the phrase again that you just used?
Fair exchange, no robbery. So that means if I tell you, okay, so if I go on my phone and I show you a naked picture of me and you don't show me one of you.
Tamron, I told you not to bring this up out here. Clever, you.
You've robbed me, Ricky. So fair exchange, no robbery. So it's like, you gotta give the same thing. Yeah. So I felt like I'm sitting there pretending that my life is so perfect and so amazing and like, oh, what, and they're telling everything at 14. So it's like saying, put your cards on the table. So I dealt in, and I talked with my mom. I talked with my sister's children, Leroy and Damien, and asked them, were they okay with us going public with this story? And they were okay with it.
I want to go back to that phrase later in this conversation. Okay. I think specifically in regards to not just this story, but in the idea of objective reporting in general, and how that can work for and against you at times potentially. But I want to ask, when you first started doing the show and you started talking about your own past with violence, did you ever have any hesitation about that in doing it? What does that feel like, making that decision?
Well,
take us through that.
Listen, I mean, I'm like the rest of you. I read and I have celebrities that I like, and you know, we've all looked at Us Weekly or whatever here and there, and it's easy to become jaded and say, oh my God, here's another celebrity with another problem. Oh, you know, and people sometimes believe that celebrities use their story or their pain for their gain, not for the gain of others. And so I was worried that it would be seen as, here's another celebrity with some tragic story. That was my selfish side. And then I said, you know what? I don't care what anyone says. Of course, I've received a couple of tweets from someone like, way to go exploiting your sister's story. And I'm like, way to go, tell me your address and I'll find you, you know? And so, you know.
Even if you think that, why would you feel the need to share that?
You know why.
Twitter sucks.
Too much free time. And so I said, you know what, I could fall for the trick of being, you know, of some loser, or I can say, I've been in a shelter. I talked to women who were in domestic violence situations and ran out of the home with their children begging for someone to help them. I was at a shelter here locally where a woman had to leave and just flee and ride a bus across country to escape an abuser. The counselors at the shelter that I visited with David Navarro, the rock star, they told us about this little boy who'd come in with his mom. And that first night, you know, he slept and he woke up and he said, you know what, I slept with both of my eyes closed for the first time. And he was like 7 or 8. He convinced himself at night that he was keeping one eye open so that he could keep an eye on his mom. I mean, a child's mind telling him that he's a superhero. So I can either listen to that or listen to that. And I choose to use my voice for a greater good. And if someone thinks it's exploitation or they're tired of another celebrity telling a story, that's your problem. Because I know that what I am doing, A, helps me heal the pain that I have and guilt that I have, but it also has given me an opportunity to help so many other families. So that's why I do it.
And you were with Dave Navarro because he is a child. His mother was
murdered by her boyfriend, and he too didn't talk about it for a long time. And he has a documentary which you should see. It's phenomenal. But he's so real and he's so raw. And we were invited to a Safe Horizon shelter here in the city. And I mean, listen, they couldn't even give us the address. That's how secretive it is, because abusers will go to the shelter. They feel they own that person. So, you know, Dave and I kind of were swept in secrecy. But when you're inside and you think shelter and beds, it's nothing like that. You know, the Safe Horizon shelters, they have their own apartments. They have playrooms for the kids. Is it home? No. Is it a Safe Horizon? Absolutely it is. And so it's just great to be there with him, and having that personal connection with him has been tremendous.
So going into the 5th season of Deadline Crime, what has been your objectives in the past for the show and the stories that you want to cover? And has that changed over the course of time while you've been doing the show? No,
it hasn't. I mean, Ricky, for me, my objective is to allow families to tell their story, to find the I don't believe in closure. I don't think there's a set for me. I mean, no offense to therapists out there, but I don't believe. I think this notion that suddenly someone you love is gone, and that, I don't know, 5 years, 3 days, and 27 hours, you're going to wake up and go, oh, wow, that didn't happen. Hasn't been the case for me, I should say. And so for me, when these families who are still suffering, I mean, our last episode this past Sunday is a 12-year-old boy, Garrett, whose murder has been unsolved. And his uncle, this, you know, big upstate, strapping New York, you know, upper state New York. I'm from Texas. I still don't get my geography. I guess it's called upstate. I'm like, upper state New York. I'll be hearing about that online. Upstate New York.
It's called Upper State.
Upper State,
you
girl.
Don't care about
you Southerner. But upstate New York, strapping guy, sports, you know, all those stereotypes. He was that, just bawling in front of me, because this child he loved like his own, his nephew, and he helped raise him. Garrett's dad passed away suddenly when he was young, so the uncle had come into Garrett's life and was a surrogate dad. And then he loses Garrett. And actually, talking about social media, someone tweeted me during the show, I saw this episode before. I don't even know what they're talking about. Can we get some new episodes? I'm like, wait a minute. I've never had a family say, stop airing that story again. So I don't care if 99 people have done it. I'm in the home. I'm talking to Garrett's family, and we are looking for justice for Garrett. So for me, it's a number of different motivations, but the most important is that we're invited into the home and that the families trust me enough to tell the story of what happened. Our premiere episode included Tyler Perry. Tyler put up a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest or whatever of these two young men who basically vanished, and they were last seen with a Naples, Florida police officer who's now no longer a police officer. He's been dismissed from his job, but he's never been charged. And Tyler has put up $100,000 to help solve this case. So, and he actually saw it on a local news report several years ago, but then felt like there was no national media attention. So my goal is to give families like Marcia, her son was one of the men who disappeared, a voice.
I caught the episode about Garrett. It's extremely powerful, and it's one of those. It's a very difficult case for the family because the evidence isn't necessarily there. There is a racial component that is undeniable for the person who's been accused. It's a fascinating is the wrong word because I think that sounds like I'm enthralled by somebody else's pain, but it is.
But that's okay because it is fascinating because we are fascinated by the justice system.
Yes.
We are fascinated by,
crime.
Crime, but I think it's because I don't think most people are like, ooh, I think it's, but for the grace of God, there go I. I mean, some of these cases are people who fell in love with the wrong person or wrong place, wrong time. One of the episodes we have coming up, this young guy, aspiring musician, he and his friends are at a studio, and it goes really bad, and he ends up killed along with his friend, another unsolved murder. And his mother has since used her voice, and now she's a city council member in their town in Florida. But, I was just reading in the news, there was a Super Bowl party in Dallas, and 7 people were killed in Plano right outside of Dallas. You're at a Super Bowl party, and from what I read before I came in, it was believed to be a part of a domestic dispute over a divorce. Okay, you're at someone's house, and you never know. So I don't think we should live in fear. Don't get me wrong. I live in New York City. I walk around, but, it's not always bad things happening to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to people who take all types of precaution, and bad things can happen in love, and that's what some of these episodes deal with.
Absolutely. I'll go one step further and say that even bad things shouldn't even happen to bad people.
No, I've met some pretty bad people.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
There's some that I'm like, and you deserve this. Bye-bye.
I want to go back to your beginnings, Tamron. You said you were first on television when you were 18 years old.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I started out in Philadelphia. I went to Temple University, and I met this man, Bert Watson, who was the manager for Joe Frazier, the boxer. And I somehow ended up hanging out with them, and they were doing a TV show for this cable company called Wade Cablevision. And I got into TV, and I started covering lacrosse, volleyball, soccer, a bunch of other sports I've never played or heard of. I'm like, lacrosse? I'm from Texas. I'm like, is that a form of football? Because I never heard of this. And I started covering, and then I did camera work. I was a camera operator at University of Pennsylvania football games. But because Joe Frazier was kind of overseeing my career, and I was super cold upstairs, I complained, so they moved me because you don't want to get beat up by Joe Frazier. And so I got moved to Chiron, and I could write a book and talk all day, but I can't count to 10. And Chiron, for football, you have to go like, first down and 30, and I was like, and I kept putting the wrong Chiron up on the screen.
Yeah,
and there was no tape delay. It was college football, so I'm just screwing everybody. They kicked me out the booth, and you can't fire me because of Joe Frazier, and so
just put her on camera.
They put me on camera.
Can I be honest? That's what happened to me one time.
Really?
They're like, oh, just put him on camera. He doesn't know what he's doing over here.
That's exactly. I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't know if I was going to be print or a magazine. I wasn't sure. But when I got booted out of the Chiron, by this man named Jan. What's up, Jan? It's like, I got moved to be sideline reporter. And I started doing sideline reports, and then they had me do volleyball, lacrosse, field hockey, and I kind of started out that way. And then I did a little community affairs show where I did kind of reports. And I also did the commercials for the cable company telling you how to pay your cable bill.
So being on air and a host or a journalist or an on-air personality, all the things that you have sort of been able to do over the past number of years that you've been doing it, wasn't necessarily something that you sought out or was your initial ambition?
I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I mean, I was born in Luling, Texas, a very, very tiny town. I've told this story. I was the only child born in the hospital that day in the entire town. And my
miracle.
Well, my mom's name is Mary. Thank you to the Christians. My grandfather had a second grade education. My mother and my biological father broke up very soon after I was born. And so I always preferred hanging around the old people in this small town because my grandfather lived on a street of aging African Americans where their kids were moving out of Luling. They weren't staying, so it was a dying street. And many of the people on that street, like my grandfather when I was born, I mean, he was in his 80s, I feel. And there was another woman named Mama Susie, who was kind of like a midwife for me. She was down the street. You ever see Harriet Tubman, Miss Jane Pittman? She looked like Miss Jane Pittman, but was real. And I would go down and I'd hang out with her. And I preferred their company over my peers. And so I kind of grew up as an old soul. And listening and reading were a big part of what I did daily, and I just enjoyed it, and I knew I was going to be a journalist. I knew that I had to have some kind of connection to people in that way, but I didn't know. I once applied for, like, I don't know, like a job at Wall Street Journal out of college. They're like, yeah, get out of here. I was like, okay, great.
Go be on camera.
Go be on camera.
As you progressed through being on camera and you made your way to the Today Show, what was it like for you with the journalistic heart to sort of be doing that show 3-4 hours a day? A wonderful show. I mean, it's a staple of American television.
Of course it is. It's Americana.
Yeah, but there is an element, I think, for those who were journalists before or journalists while there of like having to sort of, you know...
It never, I know what you're saying. So, you know, people would always say, oh my gosh, you're doing cooking segments or you're doing, you know, pie throwing or whatever the case may be. And I get that part of it. However, I'll tell you, and I've been in morning TV since I was 27. I'll be 47 this Saturday. So that's 1,000
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm 47. I can't believe it.
Also, I just want to say, cooking segments and pie throwing are very fun.
Well, let me tell you, not just fun, but in a day, people would come up to me and I'd have a big interview on MSNBC, some big political thing or whatever. And I did both shows at the same time, the same day, 45 minutes apart. I could do like a, you know, I don't know, fabulous hot wing recipe and interview literally Barack Obama. People are like, what's that hot wing recipe? Because I think sometimes, you know, listen, what I made for dinner or what you make for dinner at home is the most important thing. You're coming home, I don't know what I want. I've got kids. I don't have kids. I got just ramen noodles. I'm going to throw some weenies in the ramen noodles. I got hot dogs and I don't know. And it's like people connect to that. We all eat. You know, we all have that connection. So when people would say, oh, that's frivolous, and we all laugh, and we all want to feel good. So when people look down on morning TV or, you know, platforms that are not always, you know, NPR quality, you know, I say be very careful. We have to be layered. And, you know, one of my favorite movies, which I recite this all the time, is Shrek. I know. It's creepy that I love Shrek, but it's a true story. I'm obsessed with Shrek. And
you don't just like Shrek, you are obsessed with Shrek.
I would marry Shrek if he were available.
You have like
if Fiona hadn't gotten him, he'd be mine.
Like a signed Mike Myers Shrek poster
Not
in your room
Mike Myers,
or something?
Shrek.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I don't see Mike Myers. I see Shrek.
So you would want him to
He's
sign
real
it
to me,
Shrek.
Ricky.
Yeah.
And so in Shrek, he's talking to Donkey, who's not Eddie Murphy. He's Donkey to me. And he says, you know, we're layered like parfait. And then Shrek says, like an onion? He's like, no, like a parfait. We're layered. If we were at dinner and you only talked about sports, I think you were a bore. If you only talked about politics, I think you were a bore. If you talked about sports, politics, life, fashion, I'd find you interesting. And that's what morning TV tries to do. And that's why I think I fit very well into daytime and morning, because I want to be layered. I don't want you to come to my home and we only talk about the current landscape. I want you life started before, what's happening now, and it will continue. And I want you to be layered. I wouldn't want, I was just at a fashion event. I don't want to sit here and hear you talk about designer labels that are $3,000. Tell me what you found at H&M. And I'm like, hey girl, Bob, where'd I get that? So
did doing the MSNBC show later in the day help fuel your
100%.
energy for the other, and vice versa, I would imagine?
100%. It was a perfect blend of who I am. I love the hunt of breaking news, meaning it's real time. You can't control it. And so I love that energy of it. I love the seriousness of it when it is serious. And so for me, going and doing the Today Show, then running 45 minutes, over to MS, and then on weekends, what people don't realize, going back to Deadline Crime, I shot it. Now I've got the time. I shot Deadline Crime on the weekend, so I would leave the studio at MSNBC on a Friday and get on a plane, and crimes don't seem to happen down the street from my home, so it required me to get on a plane, a train, an automobile, a camel, a moose, and I'm like, okay, 3 days later, I'm at the scene.
Were you ever emailing producers, nothing around Manhattan, guys?
I was like, you got something in Florida? Hey, everything crazy happens in Miami, let's go, But no, we would, I ended up in Three Rivers, Michigan last season in the middle of a blizzard, and the only thing that was open was a donut place, and I go in, and this little old lady, and I hate to describe people by their ethnicity, but she was like this little old white lady, and she was like, Tamra? What are you doing in Three Rivers? I'm like, the hell if I know. Let me get a donut, and I bought her a donut. It was like great, but I was in a blizzard sliding off the road in like a Hyundai. It was terrible. But,
I got to ask. You said 20 years in morning television. That means like really 20 years at least, at least in live television. At this point. What was and I hate to do this to you because it's going to be embarrassing, but what was your biggest head-slapping moment in all of those years where you went, I can't believe I just did that on live television?
What? I've had many, but the first one that comes, can you swear on this? Oh, okay. I said, I was getting ready to leave Chicago, and I just gotten, called up to New York, and Chicagoans are very sensitive because, the whole second city thing, and they don't want to feel like you're leaving them. And I'm like, I'm not leaving. I love Chicago. In July, it's amazing. I really actually love Chicago. But I was getting ready to leave, and I said, Shitty of Chicago instead of City of Chicago. I was like running. I was like, what? O'Hare Airport hanging on the side of United flight, I was like, and it was completely like city. I have big teeth. I can't. So I'm like.
Also, things happen. I mean, 25 years on live television, like things like that are going to happen.
I swear a lot in my personal life, which I'm working on. It's a word. I'm trying. It's a Southern. I don't know, but I can swear like. I'm embarrassed by it, but I do swear a lot. And I only cursed once. Well, twice. Shitty of Chicago, which meant city. And then on the Today Show, I forget we were doing something, and I said, well, that's a hell of a story, because I didn't like the story. I was being sarcastic, but it came out of my mouth.
That's not that bad of a swear.
I know, because I can get down, but that wasn't... No.
Were you reprimanded? Were they like, hey, you can't do that?
No. Oh. It's fun. They just laughed. I mean, I imagine if it was something more serious, they would have been like, what? This is Americana.
Let's get some questions from the audience. Who has a question?
Hi, Tamron.
Hi.
I love your fashion sense.
Thank you. So I'm trying to get braids. I've been trying all summer.
Okay.
My hair is you've never had braids. Okay, so Ricky, your hairs have a little length to it.
Yes.
And Eva Marcel, I'm obsessed. Do you follow her on Instagram? Her braids are the beast of life. So I'm trying to now work out with my stylist. We're going to get 4 people to come over, because you know how long it probably took. Guess how long it takes for that?
Well, I'll guess. 6 days.
She's not creating the world. She's not God.
He took a day off. It's true.
It's something like a delicacy, but it's so...
Like hours?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like hours. And so you got to get, you have patience, or you get like a lot of people. So I'm obsessed with your hair.
A lot of people, a book.
It's beautiful.
Yes.
It's
binge like a Netflix show while they're doing it, like everyone can watch and stuff.
It's binge watch Insecure. That's what I should have done. That's my favorite show. I'm sorry.
So my question is...
Anyway, what were we saying? No, sorry, I'm just kidding.
So in learning and understanding the intent of some of these horrific crimes these people create, what have you learned about love versus hate, or good versus evil?
I believe that most people are good, but I have looked evil in the face. A couple of times that come to, I have looked at people, and I don't know if I've ever told this story publicly, maybe once. I interviewed a man. I knew he hadn't been charged yet, but I knew he'd murdered his parents. And I swear to you, like I'm looking at you right now, I could see the word evil on his forehead. I thought I was hallucinating, and I could see it. I sat across from a woman who'd murdered a child. She was an accomplice in a horrible murder of a child. This was a couple of years ago. She was on death row, and she's like, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. And we got up, and she touched me. And normally I could keep my cool, and I said, don't touch me. And I felt, I should have just, but it was like a snap reaction that I didn't want her to touch me. So I've faced and looked at evil, but I don't believe most people are bad. I think most people want the same things. They want a fighting chance. They want good things for their families, for their kids if they have them, for their parents, because I think we all have those. And so, I don't think that, but I've learned that, when we are at our worst, meaning pain in our lives, there's always someone around who wants to be there for you. And that applies to like domestic violence. A lot of the women feel they're alone. And I'm like, you're not alone. You think you are, but you're not. Or I had a woman say, I don't want to get my family mixed up in my mess. And I'm like, you know what? There are so many people who'd be happy to get in the mess with you and help save you. So I think that there are some evil people, but for the most part, doing this series, even with Garrett's case, people rallied with his family, and they're trying to find justice for him. Or Tyler Perry, who had millions of dollars, and he stops and calls a complete stranger to offer his money as a gesture to help. I hope I answered it. And I'm still obsessed with your hair.
I'll give you my stylist.
Oh, done. Done.
Next question right here.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks for sharing. It's really interesting to hear why you're drawn to telling stories about crime. And there's such an audience for it. I wonder, you sort of touched on it, but why do you think people are so drawn to these stories?
I think we all fancy ourselves part investigator, part lawyer. We're like, what? I could have solved that case. I'll put you behind bars. I was on my way to a vacation spot recently. The O.J. Simpson thing happened again. I'm like on an island, and everyone on the island, I'm like, there's the ocean and there's O.J., and everyone's like, O.J. I think we're all fascinated as like criminologists. One of the things, with my sister's case, people often say, it hasn't been solved. And I said, listen, we thought the same thing. Crime is not that easy. There are many, many things that lead or that are supposed to lead to someone being found guilty or innocent, because the idea is you don't send innocent people to jail. We know that's not the case. I interviewed a man who was on death row for 25 years in Chicago. One of the most difficult interviews I'd ever done. He got out of prison. He had the, I don't know how to phrase it, but basically his education level was that of a second grader. He was, a 30-something-year-old man and was railroaded into prison. So I think that we're all fascinated how injustice happens, how justice happens, forensics. It's science. I hated science in school, but I'm fascinated by, forensic science criminology. Even one of the cases this season, they actually now have like criminologists, if that is the word, that focus solely on cellular, like pinning down crimes on cellular data. And I'm not talking about like just tower pings. And one of them is in New York, and this woman who is a rare breed in her category, this season, she's a part of the puzzle that solves this case with incredible, so watch your cell phones, I'm just telling you, there's nothing you're saying and doing and no one's watching, they can find anything. Even when you throw it in the river, they can find it. But it's fascinating, just I think to most people, it's like it's intrigue, but also it is, oh my gosh, could this happen to me?
It's also, in many ways, the most sort of basic elemental narrative. Mm-hmm. Who did it?
Who did it?
Yeah.
It absolutely. And even when you say he did it, it's still,
I'm only 30 minutes into the show.
Yeah.
It couldn't be
but
him.
It couldn't be him. It's like, and I have had a couple of cases. So I get oh gosh, it's as thick as this thing, a folder of each case. And so I have a ritual where I take the case and I kind of pray and meditate over the person who's passed away. I know it sounds very witchy, but it's what I do. And I pray for their family. I pray for them. I have only one rule. I cannot see crime scene video or tape or anything like that. My first season, there was a body of a young boy, a college student who'd been murdered, and I didn't know it was in the packet. And I flipped over, and even when I think about it now, it just freaks me out. And so I can't look at anything like that. Sorry. That really still sticks with me. And so that's my only rule, but I really focus on the case, but there were a couple of times, so they do a synopsis and they don't even tell me who did it. And so like a couple of times, of course, you was like, the husband, I'm like, oh, he did it. And then by the end, I'm like, he didn't do it. Oh my gosh, you know. So they do some trickery with me because they want me to follow it like that you would at home.
You said you meditate over it, and you joked that it sounds witchy, but I feel like I kind of understand why you would be compelled to do something like that, and I'm curious if it's because it's a way of adding even more substance to their life for you, because you as a reporter, as a storyteller, you do drop in, and then you have to move on to the next story.
And you do.
I'm wondering if this is your chance, just sort of to sit with it and really take it in.
I think it is, and I think it's my way of honoring them, and I don't want them or their families to ever feel that I'm sharing their story for a rating, and we know rating means paycheck. I don't want anyone's life to be that for me. And so for me, I try to take that time with that person and give them the thoughtfulness, because to your point, I'm there a couple of days and I'm gone. And that's the nature of what I do, but that doesn't have to be the nature of how I live.
And I want to take it back before we go to our last question. The phrase that we talked about earlier.
Fair exchange, no robbery.
Fair exchange, no
robbery.
robbery.
Have you never been on the south side of Chicago? This is a very common thing. You've heard it? Of course.
I love
the 4 black people in front.
Hello, yes.
5. He's like, I don't know. 6.
Right here. I'm wondering if you ever thought about this phrase. We talk about objective reporting a lot, and it's gotten a lot of criticism, especially I think in the last year or two, and whether or not if it's necessary anymore. And I'm wondering if fair exchange, if you think that also could apply to you as the reporter and the audience that you have. If you are presenting someone with an argument to an audience, but then not presenting what you know to be the sort of factual analysis of that.
Well, I mean, what is factual analysis? Because it is also in the eye of the beholder. I mean, we're still trying to analyze this past election, but if you go to a county that went for Trump and a county that went for Clinton, they're going to still have very different views, even at this point. I mean, we talk about, the approval rating of the current president being 36%, but it's still very high.
That was his approval rating when he won.
No, but that's national. Republicans, it's still very high. So when you see the news flash, she's got 36% approval, that's nationally. Now break it down to the people who voted for him. So what is analysis at this point? I think that, yes, there are certain things. Hurricane Katrina, they say nobody's drowning. Wait a minute, there's people on top of the roof. You can't, that's undeniable fact. But so many things are still subject to how you live your life and where you live your life. I've talked a lot about, yes, this is an American dream, and there are beautiful things, and I love my country. My father was in the Army for 30 years. When people would come to our home in Texas, I'm like, the house with the big American flag on the front, that's ours. Right there. So I grew up very patriotic, and I am very patriotic. However, I've interviewed a black man that was put in prison for 25 years who could not read. I know that you can't pick who you're born to and where you're born. And so geography, if you're born in a rural county in Mississippi with, problem schools, or if you're born in a situation with a single parent who loves you dearly, but they're having to work 3 jobs, so they cannot sit and read all night to you and help you hand to hand with your homework, and they're doing the best they can, versus a kid, and no fault of their own, and whose parent can afford a $30,000 pre-K. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing either, but those are variables that you cannot control the minute you're born. So for me, perspective of who we are, we cannot deny it's where we're from. So what is fact anymore? Because, I tell people sometimes I've covered all kinds of stories, and I was one of the first reporters that was allowed inside the Texas militia after Oklahoma City. And so, I've reported on the south side of Chicago, and people say, oh, the south side of Chicago is so dangerous. I'm like, and so is an all-white county in Oklahoma with a Texas militia. I'm like, it's perspective, I'm like, because I've been fine on the south side, But of course, it's perspective. And so I think that as we try to understand each other, as we try to understand ourselves, I truly believe that we have to put a lot of emphasis, or more emphasis, on where we're from and why people think the way they do. It's not always because they hate you. It's not always because they want to close the door on you. Now, there's a lot of hate, and we've seen the ugliest of it, not just in the last month. We can look at a lot of video, and there's proof positive of it. But I think in at least my journey, even when I feel like someone is completely out of their mind, or if I cannot see your perspective, I try to say, okay, why does this person not understand same-sex marriage? I'm like, wait a minute, my babysitter was gay, and I know my whole life and all my friends, so why? Maybe they don't know. Maybe they've not been around. So are you open to talking about it? Now, if you're open, we can discuss. Now, if you're going to put your fist up and push me back, then I have no time. But if you're willing to sit here and say, help me understand same-sex marriage. I grew up in a church where I was told that it was wrong. Help me understand, or we talk about it. I'm willing to do that.
That was something that I was impressed with in regards to the episode about young Garrett's death, is there is a brief moment, and I think I touched on this when we were talking about it before, where a commentator says, now imagine how he feels. He's a minority, there's 3 white cops, and he's alone in this office. And when it comes to true crime shows, you never get that added perspective or context.
Or even poverty. I did a story in Wisconsin, working class white guys, they worked at a paper mill factory, and they were all accused of murder. So in that situation, you don't have any money, you can't buy the best lawyer, so it's not a race component, it's an economics component, because it's like, I know how it feels to be black, thankfully I understand it, but a poor white guy in Wisconsin, and you're in there and they're like bail money, and you're like, can you call somebody to call this lawyer? Or he's too expensive, and the odds, you feel like the odds are against you too. So for me, I know my journey, and I know the pain, and I know the happiness of being a strong black woman. But in this series, I can sit there across from a guy from Wisconsin, a white male who someone might tell me is my enemy, and I can see how vulnerable he is in that situation, being accused of a murder he didn't commit, but being too poor to defend himself and get the right lawyer. So that's what I mean by perspective.
Absolutely. And was that something that was important for you in doing the show, that you applied sort of socioeconomic perspective and context to? Because
law, listen, a good lawyer costs money. I mean, there was the O.J. Simpson trial. The reason why it was compelling, it touched on all of that. Race, money. I mean, he had a
celebrity.
His lawyers were called the Dream Team. I mean, you don't lose with the Dream Team. We would have the Nightmare Team. I mean, it's like, come on. I mean, he had a law team, and I interviewed Johnny Cochran. One of the most difficult interviews I ever had, because he's a brilliant man, but he's complicated. And I'm, God rest his soul, and I was a fan, and I cannot lie, because I mean, people also made the total sum of his law career all about O.J. when he had defended many people prior to that, and the injustices that we still talk about. So that was a fascinating interview for me, but I think law, justice, it boils down to race. This episode coming up this Sunday, a same-sex couple, and part of the trial, they're in upstate, they're in New Hampshire area, in what they call the bucolic, I'm like, what does that mean? But a lovely area that they'd gone and raised, like bucolic, I can't even spell it, but that was part of the story. But a component came into play, the jury, and how the jury saw this couple, these 2 women who were married. And did that cause the delays and the complications that you'll see on this Sunday? So we try to tap into all of that, because I believe a major part of that case and the way people saw it was because there were 2 women who were married. So I think it's complicated.
I think we have time for one more question right here.
Hi, sir.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. And I just want to say how much we appreciate your professionalism and positive attitude, even when you're telling difficult stories. I was wondering if you can share a little bit about your upcoming daytime talk show, and if there's any
Did Harvey Weinstein tell you to do that? No,
he did not. And
he's upstairs.
Yes, he's everywhere.
And is there a different take you want to have with your show versus other shows that have been on?
I'm so glad you did that, because I was running out of time.
Ricky, I stalled him out. No, you know what? I'm super excited. We teamed up with Harvey Weinstein, who is just an amazing person. Harvey came to me right after I'd made the decision to try something new, and he just hit all the right notes. He just said, I've been watching you, and it's kind of, I joked like, okay, you've been watching me, now what? What do we do? But I know that, as I said before, going back to my main man, Shrek, I want a layered show. I want a show where we can laugh, and I don't want to make you cry. I want to cry with you. I want to laugh with you, and I want us to talk about complicated things, and it's not mimicking any shows or, everyone is always making comparisons. It's just life, you know what I mean? It's what you do. I hate when people, well, what's his show like? And I'm sure you've had people compare you to other people that have been on air or this style show. The bottom line is it's about a connection. I don't know you. We met upstairs in the green room. We had an instant connection because we were both willing to be our authentic selves. And so that's really the show. I mean, it's kind of the person you knew in Chicago. I hope you think that I'm the same girl I was 10 years ago. I've had the same best friend since I was 4 years old. She was the first girl to beat me running in track. And we talk every day, and she's a mother now. I hope to be a mom someday. And, we've evolved, but I'm still Tamron. And that's kind of where we're coming from.
You said laugh with you and cry with you rather than make you laugh or make you cry. And I'm wondering if that means a little bit for you dropping some of the wall that has to come up.
Have you seen a wall with me?
No. But I mean, I think when it comes to sort of breaking news reporting and upfront sort of objective journalism that you would have to do on like an MSNBC, if you look forward to sort of being able to shed some of that for the show.
Deadline Crime has given me that. I mean, you listen, the first season I went in and, you're like, I can't cry. I'm a journalist. You're not supposed to cry. And then, I don't know, I wish I could tell you the moment because I don't know, but I just started like being myself. And I know that it was one case in particular. A young girl had committed suicide and her father was with me and he was just devastated, and he was crying, and he couldn't understand Nadia taking her life, and he cried, and I couldn't stop crying. And I went home, and I couldn't stop crying. And I just said, I'm not going to hold this in. I have to be myself. And how can you sit across from someone who's experienced so much pain and keep a stone face? That's ridiculous for me. Now, it might work for other people. I'm not saying anyone should have their career operate the way I've chosen to operate mine. But for me, there's no way in the world I'm going to sit across from a detective just recently, one of the cases, like central casting, like blazer, like Angie Dickinson, police lady. And I asked her something, and she got up, she started crying. And she'd never, I bet you, cried in front of a reporter. But I think she felt that moment where we were going to cry together. She had some remorse about the case. And so I don't have a wall. I don't want people to have walls around me. I'm not a journalist. That's what I do for a living. I'm Tamron. I'm a person. You're a person. And these things will infiltrate our jobs and who we are. The book I read just quickly is Path of Light, and it talks about who are you when there's no title beneath your business card. If it just says Ricky, does your life still matter to you?
No. No, of course it does. Of course it does, yeah.
He's like, I need Ricky, COO, CEO, Jay-Z friend. I'm like, no.
That was the quickest, funniest answer that I had. But Jesus Christ, I hope so.
Yeah. So it's like if your card doesn't say anything but your name, do you still matter to you?
I'm actually actively antagonistic towards career and ambition. Just
is that what your
so
card
that
says?
Make it substance. No, because I'm so scared of not having that substance beneath my name that I think
you
I'd
have
become.
to release that. I feel like it's therapy now. You owe me money.
I'd love to turn this into a therapy
you
space
have
for
to.
me.
I'm working on releasing it. This book I've carried around since I was 18. It's all, my dog is eating it up. It's been wet, falling in the bathtub. I take it everywhere, coffee stains. But the message really is, who are you? Because at some point, we're all going to be a former something. At some point, you won't be hosting this show. Hopefully, you'll retire and do something else or just chill. You will be a former television personality, a former bank teller, a former teacher. We're all going to be former something in our careers. What does that mean to you? That's the question.
More time. More time. Tamron, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for being here. Deadline Crime with Tamron Hall, Sunday night on ID Discovery, right?
Yes.
Tune in. What time on Sunday?
10 Eastern, 9 Central. And I often live tweet and Instagram through the show. So.
And I really look forward to your upcoming daytime talk
Me
show
too.
when it comes out with Harvey Weinstein.
I got too much free time.
Everybody, thank you so much.